What are recommended tests to obtain for optimizing fertility?
The best tests for optimizing fertility?
Mm-hmm.
Well, first, I would say track your cycle. You are an advocate of this as well in terms of understanding your own unique rhythm. So, the first thing is tracking your cycle. It can be on an app, it can be on an Excel spreadsheet, Google Sheet, whatever. I know there's a question around contraception. And so this is kind of related to that. I'm a big fan of like fertility awareness method or FAM that's going to serve you for as a contraceptive if you don't want to get pregnant. And if you do want to get pregnant, understanding your cervical mucus, which is, it's not just sort of like gunk in your underwear. It's actually it's giving you clues and signs in terms of where your estrogen levels are at. Are you fertile right now? And we'll talk about what that might look like in a moment. But for like FAM or fertility awareness method, you're tracking a couple of things. One is the cervical mucus, as I mentioned, your basal body temperature. So your temperature will change over the course of your cycle, and that can indicate ovulation. You'll often see ovulation, you'll see a bit of a spike in your basal body temperatures. It might be like zero point 0.5 to even like 1 degree Fahrenheit. If you're working in Celsius, it might be zero point 0.2 to zero point 0.5 degrees Celsius. Like you may see if you're wearing an Oura ring, as I am right now, if you're watching this on video, you're going to get knocked on your readiness score because you're going to be warmer. You know, it's like, oh, you were warm last night. And it's like, yeah, I'm ovulating, you know. And then the other thing, this might require a little bit more internal exam or self-internal exam, is like the cervical position, right? So when we are ovulating or ready to receive, let's say, sperm, the opening of the cervix will be softer versus when we are infertile or not ready to receive the sperm. Your cervix, the tip of the cervix, let's say, or what you can sort of feel internally is going to feel quite hard. It might even almost feel like the tip of like almost like the tip of your nose. It might feel like a little bit like there's a resistance there, but when you're ovulating, that softens up and it allows for the passage a bit more open and a bit more effaced. So you're allowing for sperm to sort of pass through. So that's sort of FAM in a nutshell. That would be what I would do first. Was really understand your own cervical mucus pattern, your own basal body temperature pattern. I'll be doing internal examinations to kind of get to know your cervix because none of us do. I remember once I had put a post up about cervical mucus and people were it was like it was shocking to people. It's like, well, this is, this is what we do. Like this is, when we see estrogen rising. So I'll sort of answer this question comprehensively. As we see estrogen rising in the follicular phase, so after bleed week stops, we're going to start to see a rise in estrogen. That's going to coincide with more wetness, right? So you're going to see in your underwear, you might see more slipperiness, more almost clear discharge. And then as you're getting closer to ovulation, that discharge is going to start to look more opaque, a bit more white. Some people will call it like lotion or even like egg whitey, like an egg white almost consistency. If you were to put it in between your fingers, as I have, you might find that you can sort of stretch it. It has a little bit of like malleability to it. The last day where you see that kind of gooey stretchiness, that opaque presentation is when you are ovulating. So the next day you're going to start to see a marked change in the mucus where it's not going to be as egg whitey. It's not going to be as slippery anymore. It's almost, you're going to sort of move into like almost like a bit of a dry, because estrogen falls off after we ovulate, estrogen comes down. So you're going to see the same corresponding lack of wetness, let's say, in your underwear. So that would be the best way for you to be thinking about fertility, at least for the first year of trying. If you are trying for a year, even over 6 months, then I would actually get him tested and you tested. So if it's oftentimes when we look at fertility, we typically tend to blame the woman first. We tend to be like, oh, there must be something wrong with her. So let's just check all of her stuff. So you can totally get your hormones checked. You can look at AMH, you can look at FSH, you can look at all your sex hormones. And I would also get his sperm checked as well. So we are looking at count, like how much, let's say, parts per million or how much sperm we have in one ejaculate. And then you also want to be looking for the quality of the sperm as well. So, a glutination, like there's different sort of presentations of sperm. Like you have like the healthy sperm that we think about with the single head and the single tail. And then you see variations. Sometimes you see a double-headed sperm. Sometimes you see sperm without a flagellum. Like you see all of these different kind of mutations, we'll say. So we want to look at sperm count, which is a really big problem. Dr. Shauna Swan, I had her on the show. She was talking about sperm decline over the last, I think it was 50 years. I think the last they were looking at from the 1960s, or maybe actually maybe later, maybe the 1970s to like the last time they looked was like maybe 2010, and it had decreased by more than 50%. So if there's a problem with fertility, it can be coming from the man or it can be coming from the woman or both, right? So we just want to look at both. Oftentimes there is a tendency to look at the female first, but it's very easy to evaluate male sperm count as well. So I would just put that into the mix initially too.
Love that explanation. So thorough. And, when we're thinking about infradian rhythms, our internal rhythms that we have over a 28, 30-day cycle, it's so helpful to be aware of what's going on in our bodies. Like I was just talking to a client who's in her 50s, and she said, no one ever told me what to expect at any stage of
I
my life.
know.
We were just kind
Yeah.
of handed off oral contraceptives, sent on our merry, happy way. And then
Yeah.
years later, you're realizing, oh, I've been so disconnected from the normal physiologic rhythms of the body. And so, I think that cycle tracking, checking your basal body temperature, looking at cervical mucus, and even if you don't feel 100% comfortable looking at your cervical mucus, just acknowledging there's changes throughout your cycle is so helpful and beneficial. The other thing that I would say is for me personally, I don't know how much I've talked about this on the podcast, but this is how I knew I wasn't ovulating. When I was in my early 30s, when my husband and I got married, I had no idea that I was thin phenotype PCOS. No idea. And it was
Hmm.
only because I brought in all these charts. Back then, you didn't put them in an app that was preceding the app
Right.
stage of life, but showing
Right.
them to my GYN. And the first thing she said is, you have a luteal phase defect. You don't have enough progesterone. I need to refer you on to someone. And
Hmm.
that was, kind of started our infertility journey. But the acknowledgement of if I had not done that basic assessment for a couple months, we would not have been able to objectively look at the information and say, well, I'm not even ovulating. No wonder why I'm not getting pregnant. So you
Right.
don't
Right.
necessarily have to use all the high level tech to start with. Like this kind of observational data can be very helpful. And as Stephanie indicated, the lab work can complement and also help identify if there are any issues. What we find now is that men in particular, either from insulin resistance or endocrine mimicking chemical exposure, and we have so much of it, that can plummet sperm counts for men. So you could look healthy on the outside and not either have a healthy, vibrant sperm count, or your motility may be poor, or you may have, as you mentioned, the double headed sperm with a lack of flagella. You might have a lot of defects in the sperm themselves. So knowledge is power. Most people don't have any issues getting pregnant. That's not the why I'm sharing this. I'm just sharing that from someone who otherwise was pretty healthy, being on oral contraceptives for so many years had disconnected me from those internal rhythms of my body. And it took a bit of time for things to start working and being optimized. So such a great question. I would say knowledge is power. Do the low tech stuff first, get the testing done, talk to your clinician, make sure that they're on board with what you want to have happen. But more often than not, I find most women don't have any trouble getting pregnant, thankfully.
Yeah. And then just enjoy the other thing I'll just say is like just enjoy the process of trying to get
Yes.
pregnant. Like it's such a
Yes.
wonderful, like for at least for me, I was raised Catholic, so it was like you cannot get pregnant. Like that is the
Yes.
goal of your, existence as a woman. You cannot get pregnant. So it was almost like backwards land when me and my husband at the time we were like, all right, we're going to try for a baby. And it was so I was like, oh my gosh, like I'm a good girl. Like I don't get pregnant. But then it's like, no, this is what I want to do. I want to get pregnant. So just like lean into that, have fun with your
Yes.
partner. Don't worry too much about if you don't get pregnant one time. Like I remember for at least for me, I'll just share my own experiences. Like when I wanted babies, it was like a switch. It was like I went from not wanting them, and then all of a sudden I was noticing all of the babies in the carriages and the strollers, and I would see the babies at the park, and I was the weird person in the park, like watching the babies play. And I was like, okay, I need one of these right now. And I was, after, we had been together, I was like doing handstands and I was doing all the things, not scientifically validated technique, just for That's right, the record. But I was like, I have to get pregnant right now. And it was very easy for me to get pregnant. So I can understand and because I was like, I need a child and I need a child right now. Like it was just something switched in my biological clock. Like I need the child and I need to get pregnant right now. So I can understand the angst, if someone's trying to get pregnant and they're not, and they have that same feeling maybe that I experienced, like I want a child, like I want it, why is it not happening? I would just encourage you as much as you can to try and enjoy the process, because two stressed out individuals that are like looking at their clock and they're like, okay, we got 12 hours, honey. Let's, like it can work. And, I would just say as much as you can, it's not necessarily about the destination as much as it is about the journey together that you're taking with your partner. So I would just throw that in. It's not related to it's sort of related to the question. She didn't ask it, but I'm just
Yeah.
throwing in my own 2 cents there.
No, and I think for anyone that's listening that maybe your fertility journey was longer than others, just knowing that, even though we did use some reproductive technology, it was fairly low tech. And I was so grateful when we got pregnant with my oldest and then we got pregnant with my youngest. And I remember saying, had it been an easier process, we might have had more children, but we just felt so grateful and blessed that we had two healthy kids that we just said, okay, we're going to take a break and reassess things.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.